Welcome to Negotiation Made Simple, where we help you master the art of negotiation and win the next deal. I'm your host, John Lowry. On this episode, I'm really excited to share with you the story of the writing of Negotiation Made Simple. It's a fun story. It's a story that, frankly, I'm kind of embarrassed about in terms of how long it took me to write this book. But I think it's an important story because out of this story, there is a really powerful lesson that I will carry with me for the rest of my life, and I think can be valuable to you, not only as a leader, but also as a negotiator. This story will have 4 particular steps that I think these particular steps, if you'll use them, can be valuable in helping you get a negotiation unstuck or helping you get a deal done that has been difficult to achieve. I'll also be answering a question from a listener, so be sure to listen all the way to the end because it's a really relevant and useful question, and I hope the answer is too. So I'm excited about jumping into this episode and telling you this story. Let's get after it. My new book, Negotiation Made Simple, was released on October 31st, and it has been an outstanding month. Going on podcasts, doing media interviews, talking to people about the book. And as I've done so, one of the common questions is people will ask, tell us the story about writing the book. And I never really thought there was a story there until I realized that there actually is a powerful lesson that I think comes from the writing of the book. Certainly a lesson that I will take from it going forward, but I think it's a lesson that's valuable for everyone, and it's a lesson that actually has some application to negotiation, especially those difficult negotiations that are just stuck or the resolution seems to be elusive or the other side is just not moving. In those particular situations, I think this process that I learned writing this book can be helpful to you. So here's the story. I started writing Negotiation Made Simple in about 2015. Now, it didn't come out until 2023. That was about 8 years. And frankly, the idea of writing a book actually started well before 2015. And so overall, this book was about a 10-year journey from the time that I first thought about writing a book to the time that the book finally was released. I will admit that is not the most efficient process in terms of writing a book. It's almost embarrassing how long it took. And so what happened as I reflected back on it is I had the opportunity to go do negotiation training all over the country and have trained tens of thousands of people in both legal negotiation and sales negotiation and all other types of negotiation, working with a wide variety of executives and business leaders and others. And in that, I've developed a course that just works really, really well. This course is super interactive. This course involves a lot of conversation, but also a lot of activities. This course has a tremendous amount of humor that is a part of it, to where people are laughing and having a good time all day. And as a result of that, this course has kind of distinguished itself and has been something that companies have been giving their people over and over again, and it's just worked. And so as I got started with the process of writing the book, I started to think about how is it that I create that course experience, but to do it in the context of a book. And that's where my mind went in trying to write this book. And so I struggled because I couldn't replicate some of the course games and some of the simulations in the book. It just wouldn't work. And some of the language that I use to teach the course, well, it grows out of the simulation or the game that the participants have played. And so a lot of the language that I use to teach negotiation, it didn't apply to the book. And so I struggled trying to figure out how to translate this course into a book. And for years, I tried to figure out better ways to do that. Finally, I got to the point to where I actually had someone come and sit through a course and then provide ideas and how we could turn that course into a book. I hired a writing consultant to help me do it. And out of that kind of came a manuscript, but the reality is the manuscript wasn't that great. It still lacked a lot of punch. And so I got to the point to where I would make some progress and then I would get frustrated. And so I'd literally quit for 6 months. I just wouldn't think about it. And then I'd get the itch to write a book again, or I'd see another negotiation book come out and I'd get frustrated that it was taking me too long to get this book done. And so I'd go to work again, and yet I'd only get frustrated again because the process that I was using to write the book was the wrong process. And so finally I got to the place to where I had some really good people around me that were trying to coach me on how to write the book. And so here, Donald Miller, a Wall Street Journal best-selling author, someone who has sold tens of thousands of books, maybe hundreds of thousands of books, maybe millions of books, but a prolific author who sat down with me and was coaching me on how to write this book and how to make it very appealing to audiences. I had other writers, professional writers, who were doing the same thing, and they would read the manuscript and they would give me feedback. And what I found myself doing is I was arguing with them. I was saying, no, you don't understand. That's not how to teach negotiation. Like, we got to have this moment and it's got to work this way and the lesson has to happen in this regard. And if you do it that way, people will get it. And so we would spend a lot of time just wrestling about how to do this. And finally, I got to the point to where I realized I was about 5, 6, 7 years maybe into this project. I found myself arguing with people that had sold hundreds of thousands, if not millions of books collectively. And here I am trying to tell them how to write a book. It didn't make any sense at all. And so finally I realized that I needed to start from scratch, that the approach that I was using wasn't working. And it was time to take a totally different approach. And so I stepped back and I said, what is it that I'm really trying to do? And I literally forgot everything I knew, quite intentionally, about teaching negotiation. All those things that worked so well in the classroom, I put them aside because I needed to take a completely fresh look at how to teach negotiation through the context of a book, not a classroom. And so once I got to that place to where it was a blank slate, then I had the opportunity to begin to dream and begin to vision what kind of book that I wanted to write and how did I want that book to be received and what did I want people to get out of that book in terms of value going forward. And so here was some conversations with the publisher that was really valuable for me. They helped me understand that most of the time, people reading a book like this are going to read it during an airplane flight, or they're going to read it sitting on the beach on vacation, or they're going to listen to the book on a treadmill as they're working out in the morning, or as they're riding the train to work. It wasn't a place to where they were going to be able to interact with it in a very substantive way. They were just going to take it in and apply it. And what people were looking for was the simplest way to do that. And it was that conversation that triggered a completely different approach, to where I stepped back and I said, if I have an hour and a half, or if I've got 2 hours of someone's time, what is it that I want to say to them that can make the biggest impact on their negotiation success? What are the tools that I want to give them? What are the ideas that I want to share? What's the framework that I want to put all of this into? And how do we make that as simple as possible for them to take and to put to work the very next day? And so I started with that blank canvas. And what I found was that about a year later, I had a book. I had a manuscript that people seemed to be really excited about, that a publisher was willing to publish, that a friend in Don Miller was willing to help market, that people were excited about receiving this book and about its launch. And so I reflected back on that process of thinking about why it took so long to get to that year where finally I was productive. Finally, I was able to overcome myself and get the book written and meet the deadlines and fulfill the obligations and make sure we hit the timeline so that this book could be released October 31st of this year. And as I reflected back on that process, I realized that there were some things that I needed to unlearn. Now, I didn't have this language until I had a conversation with a gentleman by the name of Barry O'Reilly a couple of weeks ago. He wrote a book actually called Unlearn. And it was in reading that book and preparing for that conversation and then being involved in that conversation that I realized and better understood the process that I had gone through. It was a process of unlearning and relearning. Now, one of the things that I had to unlearn was I had to unlearn how to teach negotiation, because the way I knew to do it in the context in which I was doing it didn't apply to this new context. And so I had to throw it out. Everything I knew about teaching, I had to throw it out. I had to unlearn it. And then I had to take that blank canvas and I had to dream about what it is that I wanted to accomplish. And so that's what I did. I didn't really know it. I just kind of did it. But it was that process that gave me a vision of what a really practical, useful, and yet powerful book on negotiation could look like that would be different from any other negotiation book that's out there. And then from there, I began to relearn and rethink and re-engineer how it is that we would package this content and this material and this expertise to share with the world in hopefully a way that would be very valuable and very useful to everyone who reads this book. And then what happened over the last month was I began to see breakthroughs. As the book went up the list on Amazon, as the ad came out in Times Square in New York City, as all the people that had read the book started sending me emails, reacting to the book, as I read the reviews on Amazon, those were the moments where the breakthroughs occurred. And the affirmation came in terms of relearning a new process in how to teach negotiation. And so this process of writing the book, I think, is a really important lesson for leaders and for negotiators. There are moments in life where the biggest barrier to our progress or our success is not actually anyone else. It's ourself, and it's the knowledge that we have. Because that knowledge, it traps us in terms of thinking that there's only one way to do something. But the reality is that in most cases, there's lots of ways to do things. But we've got to unlearn what we know in order to give ourselves the capacity and the opportunity to learn something new and then to pursue a different way. And that's the process that I had to go through in writing this book. And so in negotiation, there are going to be moments where that deal gets stuck. There's going to be times where you just don't feel like you're making any progress and you don't know why, and you're frustrated. Now, in those moments, unsophisticated people, they'll quit. They will stop. And there were moments where I was guilty of that in this journey, to where I literally just stopped. And yet, I think more sophisticated people, what they will do is to recognize those moments as not a moment to quit, but a moment to unlearn, a moment to put aside the things that they are bringing to the table that might actually become barriers as opposed to becoming resources. To put those things aside and to think again, to rethink how to approach this problem, to rethink how to get this deal done, to try to find additional resources that you might be able to bring into it that might be able to help you in terms of that rethinking process. It's that kind of approach that all of a sudden can lead you down a path to where that deal that's been hard to achieve finally gets done. Or that person who's been really difficult to deal with, you finally find a path where you can make progress with them in terms of building a better relationship, putting a business deal together, resolving a problem, whatever the case might be. This is the moment where you allow yourself to be creative. This is the moment to where you want to learn as much as you can so that you then have that to work with to try to find new and different ways of getting things done. And so the irony of this entire process of negotiation made simple is that one of the lessons that I think is so powerful that comes from this book isn't actually in the book. It's actually the story about how the book came into existence. And so what does that mean? Well, what that means is our process of learning, it is continuous. But here is the nuance that I think is really important for us, is to recognize that the process of learning is not just about acquiring more and more and more information. Sometimes it's about being self-critical of what we know and being willing to put it aside to create the capacity for new information and new ideas and new approaches to come to the table. This is a great tool for leaders, but I also think it's a great tool for negotiators who find themselves stuck. This is your path. This is your opportunity to, out of things that seemingly have failed, how to turn those moments into great successes. So let's recap real quickly this process of unlearning and relearning that I just described. It's a process that was identified for me by Barry O'Reilly. And the process starts with diagnosing what you need to unlearn, to identifying those things that are causing us to think a certain way, even though that approach and that way isn't working or isn't making progress. How is it that we put those things aside? And then secondly, creating a blank canvas and starting from scratch in terms of creating a vision, dreaming about what it is that we want to accomplish, and then thinking again about how it is that we get there. Here's where we get to use that creative side of our brain. And we get to dream big again without the limitations of all of the frustrations of the past experience. And then we've got to go from there and we've got to put it to work. That new approach, that new idea, that fresh perspective, whatever it is, it's time to go test it. It's time to put it to work in a way that it can create success. And then we need to look for breakthroughs. And we need to determine whether or not we are making more progress than we were before, or whether or not we are finding more solutions than perhaps we were before. And as we look for those breakthroughs, those will be affirmation that the new learning that we've done is valuable and should be something that we hold on to until we find ourselves in a moment where it doesn't work again and we have to go through this process all over. All right, it's time for the Negotiation Navigator. I love this segment where I get to respond to questions from listeners of the podcast. This one is from Martin. Martin writes, "Hi, John. I'm a big fan of the podcast. I work at a technology company and we're in a bit of a tough spot with a negotiation. We're trying to get a deal done for some microprocessors for our next product, but the suppliers' prices are through the roof. We're stuck and it's putting our product launch in jeopardy. I've heard great things about your skills in tricky negotiations, and I'm really hoping you can give us some advice. Any tips or strategies to help us get past this deadlock without caving to their high prices would be a lifesaver. Thank you so much." All right, Martin. So your challenge is not that different from one that many have on a regular basis, to where we're doing business and we need our partner, we need their product or their service or whatever it is to help us supply our customers or satisfy our clients, whatever the case might be. And yet the pricing is just such that it won't work. The economics just aren't right. And yet you have this situation to where you were kind of dependent upon that supplier coming through for you, but now all of a sudden you just have the economics off because of the pricing. So here's the first thing I would do. Immediately, I would begin to look for alternatives. Now, that may not be something that you want to hear because that can be a lot of work in terms of trying to source another supplier. But the reality is number one, it's good to have multiple suppliers just because if there's any disruption. So from a business standpoint, it's not a bad thing to do anyway. And secondly, sometimes you're able to find pricing with the other suppliers that even if you don't intend to go that direction, they may compel you in terms of what you learn with a new supplier and better pricing. But there may be a situation to where that pricing is just used as leverage with this supplier. If they know that you have a good alternative, if they know that there's pricing associated with that alternative that is better than their pricing, then all of a sudden it gives you more leverage. And so that's the first thing I would do, is to start thinking about the alternatives. The next thing I would do is to start asking some questions. And so just taking the position, what you've probably already done in terms of communicating that pricing is too high, sometimes that's not persuasive enough. They will still test you. They will stick to their guns. And so now it's a question of saying, what is it that you need to learn? What is it that you need them to share to begin to think about alternatives? And so trying to find things that are important to the supplier that would have value, that if you were able to provide those things, may put them in a position to where they're willing to come off of their pricing. I saw this done really, really well with a marketing company that I was working with who ran into the same situation, although it was really the flip side. It was their pricing that was considered too high, and it was their client that was pushing them to make a concession, but they had already made all the concessions that they could really afford to make. And yet it was the largest deal in the history of this company. They really wanted to land it, but they were literally just getting pushed beyond the point of any profitability. And so we had them ask some questions about other things that would be valuable to them and whether or not this customer would be able to provide those things. And we found 11 things that would be really valuable to the marketing company. And the customer, to their surprise, agreed to all 11 things. And these were things that didn't have a bunch of monetary value, but they had tremendous value for this marketing company. So it was things like doing a PR campaign, showing the collaboration between the marketing company and this particular customer. It involved several referrals to where the marketing company was talking with these organizations, and those organizations knew this particular customer well, and they respected each other, and a phone call saying, we're going with them and here's why. That could make the difference in helping this company win those deals as well. And so begin to look for some other things that you can integrate into this, to where if you're able to provide those for your supplier, it then might create the opportunity for them to come off their pricing. The third thing I would have you think about is what I call linkage. And that would be to think about, is there another pool of value to where if you win in that pool of value, you might be able to pay a little bit more, or just the opposite. If they win in that pool of value, they might be willing to come off their pricing a little bit more. And so as I think about microprocessors and acquiring microprocessors, you might think about shipping. You might think about quantity. You might think about the length of the term of the contract. There might be some of those things that you could think about to where if you're willing to make some concessions there, it puts them in a position to where they can still come off their pricing and achieve a great deal. And so many times in situations like this, I've seen companies that have said, look, if we extend this another 1,000 units, or we extend it another 10,000 units, or whatever the case might be, would you be willing to lower the price? And for you, it just provides more certainty in terms of your supply chain. But for them, it might provide them with more revenue that is reoccurring and that they can budget on and forecast on and things like that. And as a result of that, they might make a concession on price. And so really, to answer your question, you've got to begin an exploration process in terms of exploring other levers that you can pull that can get them to a place to where they will finally make a concession on price. And if they don't make the concession on price, then think about the things that you want to get that are valuable to you in other areas to where it puts you in a position to pay more, but actually get more. So the value that you're able to capture goes up. So I wish you well with it. It's a tricky situation, but if you think about those three things and put them to work, I think one of them may be the answer to helping you get the deal you need so you can get your product launched timely and successfully. Thank you so much for that great question, Martin. If anyone has a question, please reach out and send that question. You can send it to admin@lowrygroup.net. This is one of my favorite parts of the podcast, is the opportunity to interact with you all, the listeners. And I would love to know the questions that you're asking and be able to tackle those on a future episode. Thank you for listening to this episode of Negotiation Made Simple. I just want to leave you with one reminder. And I think it's the essence of this story that I just told you about how Negotiation Made Simple came about. And it's the lesson to recognize that our knowledge and our experience and our expertise, while day to day, it serves us so exceptionally well. As we encounter new problems with new people that involve new dynamics, there are moments where we have to think anew. And we've got to put aside all that we know so that we can learn something new that will get us to the finish line or get that deal done. That's what this book taught me. And that lesson, ironically, I think is one of the most powerful lessons of the entire book. And so thank you for listening to this episode. I look forward to seeing you next time on Negotiation Made Simple.